AITA for financially cutting off my girlfriend who wanted independence. I am 27 years old, and I work as a cameraman at a local television news station. It is not a dream job, but it is stable. It allows me to cover interesting events, meet people, and most importantly, have a steady income. That is enough for me for now. My girlfriend is 25 years old. We had been together for about a year and a half when all this started to change. When I met her, she was working in the family business, a small neighborhood bakery. It was not anything big or fancy, but it had a loyal group of regular customers and enough business to keep going. Madison had studied culinary arts at the local community college, so in theory, she was in her field. She liked decorating cakes, trying new recipes, and experimenting with flavors. She was not an established professional, but she had talent and, above all, drive. At least in the beginning, during the first year of the relationship, everything was pretty normal. We went out, shared expenses when we could, and each kept to our own routines. I had somewhat irregular hours because of work covering news stories and events, and she had the bakery that opened early every day. The problem started a few months ago when the family business closed down. It was not sudden, but it happened quickly. Sales dropped off, there were issues with suppliers, and little by little the situation became unsustainable. In the end, they decided to shut it down. For Madison, it was a hard blow. She not only lost her job, but also something she felt was part of her identity. I remember the first few days after the closure, she was really down. She would spend hours in silence staring at her phone or just lying on the couch doing nothing. That was probably where it all started. I made the decision to support her financially while she got back on her feet. It was not something she asked me for directly at first. I was the one who offered. It seemed like the right thing to do. She was my partner and was going through a tough time. So we practically started living off my income. To make things easier, I gave her a debit card linked to my checking account. The idea was simple. She could buy what she needed without having to ask me for money every time. I never set strict limits for her because I trusted her. Besides, it was not like I made so much that it allowed for major extras. So I assumed that a loan would act as a natural control. At first, everything worked out fine. Madison bought the basics, went out occasionally with friends, normal things. I even tried to motivate her to start looking for a job or get back into something related to culinary arts. I suggested online courses, small business ideas, even selling baked goods from home. She always replied the same way, that she would think about it, but it never went beyond that. Weeks turned into months, and the situation began to stagnate. Madison stopped mentioning any intention of working. Instead, she started spending more and more time on social media, especially TikTok. At first, I did not think much of it. We all use social media, but in her case, it gradually became her main activity of the day. That was also where she met a group of online friends. I never met them in person, but I would hear their names in conversations or see messages when she showed me something on her phone. Initially, they seemed like normal friendships. They shared videos, talked about everyday topics, recommended things to each other, but over time the tone changed. I started to notice Madison repeating certain ideas she did not have before. Comments about independence, about not relying on anyone, about not having to give explanations. In themselves, those ideas are not bad. The problem was the way they started to influence her behavior. Before, when she used the card, she would tell me what she had bought. Not because I demanded it, but just out of simple communication. That stopped happening. She also started responding more curtly when I asked her basic questions. One day, without much context, she told me she wanted me to give her a fixed amount of money every month. I asked her what for, if she already had the card. Her response was that she did not want to feel like she had to ask for permission to use money, that she preferred to have her own monthly amount, something like an allowance. That was the first time something really did not sit right with me, not so much because of the request itself, but because of what it implied. She already had free access to the card. I never asked for explanations. I never complained about expenses. So where was that feeling of asking for permission coming from? I told her no. Not aggressively, but clearly. I explained that it made no sense to switch to a monthly money system when she already had direct access. I also mentioned that instead of formalizing a dependency, the best thing would be for her to start generating her own income. She did not like the answer. We did not have a big argument that day, but something changed. She became more distant, less communicative. She spent more time on her phone and less with me. Even so, I tried not to escalate the situation. I thought it was a phase influenced by her recent environment and that it would eventually stabilize. I was wrong. One day she simply did not come home. To give some context, Madison and I never formally moved in together from the start, but in practice, we did. She spent most of her time at my apartment. She had clothes, personal products, everything she needed, as if we were already sharing the space permanently. That day I got back from work later than usual. I had covered a local event that ran longer than expected. I arrived tired, hoping to find her as always. But she was not there. At first, I did not worry too much. I thought maybe she had gone out with a friend or gone to visit her mom. I sent her a simple text message. "Where are you?" She did not answer. A couple of hours passed. I texted her again. Nothing. I tried calling her, and it went straight to voicemail. That was when I started to get anxious. It was not normal. Even when she went out, she always let me know, even with a short message. And she had never completely stopped responding. That night I slept poorly, or rather, I barely slept. The next morning, the first thing I did was try to contact her again. Calls, messages, I even checked her social media to see if there was any activity. Nothing. At that point, my mind started going to negative scenarios. I am not a paranoid person, but when someone disappears like that, it is hard not to think something might have happened. I decided to call her mother. We did not have a close relationship, but it was cordial. I explained the situation, trying not to sound too alarmed, although making it clear that Madison had not come back and was not answering. Her reaction surprised me. Very calmly, she told me not to worry, that Madison was fine and would be back in a couple of days. I asked her directly if she knew where she was. She did not give me details. She just repeated that she was fine. That conversation left me more confused than relieved. On the one hand, it was a relief to know she was not in immediate danger, but on the other, the lack of information and her mother's overly relaxed attitude did not fit the situation. Hours passed, then the second day, then the third, with no messages, no calls, without any explanation. I kept going to work, but clearly distracted. I checked my phone constantly, waiting for a sign. Nothing. At that point, the worry began to turn into something else. Annoyance, because it no longer seemed like an accident or a situation out of her control. It seemed like a decision, and that changed everything. At the end of the third day, Madison came back. She walked into the apartment as if nothing had happened. She did not look upset, tired, or worried. She did not have the attitude of someone who had been through something difficult. In fact, she looked completely normal. Too normal. She left her purse on the table, took off her shoes, and walked toward the kitchen. I stood watching her for a few seconds, trying to process the scene. Part of me expected her to say something on her own. An apology, an explanation, anything. She did not say anything, so I got straight to the point. "Where were you all this time?" She opened the refrigerator, looked inside, and took out a bottle of water. She did not even look at me and did not answer. I thought maybe she had not heard me. I repeated the question, clearer this time. "Madison, where were you these 3 days?" This time she did react. She closed the refrigerator, turned her head slightly toward me, and completely calmly said, "I went out to clear my head. I needed to disconnect for a bit." The way she said it was what shocked me the most. There was no anger, there was no sarcasm, nor did she seem to want to provoke. She said it as if it were something completely reasonable. I stayed silent for a few seconds. "Disconnect from me?" I asked. She shrugged slightly. That answer changed everything too. Because it is one thing to think something happened to your partner, and a very different one to realize that she simply decided to disappear. "And you did not think to let me know?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "A text, a call, something." She let out a short, dry laugh. I did not have to let anyone know anything. That response threw me off. "You disappeared for 3 days, I said. You did not answer anything. I thought something had happened to you." Now she did look directly at me, and it was in that moment when I noticed something different. Distance, not physical, but emotional, as if she were no longer in the same relationship as me. "I am not a child," she said. "I never said you were." "Then do not act like I need to report to you." I frowned. "It is not reporting. It is basic communication. We are a couple." She rolled her eyes. "You are exaggerating." I felt how the conversation was starting to lose its meaning. "Exaggerating," I repeated. "You did not answer for 3 days." "But nothing happened to me," she replied coldly. "I know that now," I said. "But for 3 days I did not know." There was a brief silence, but it was not a normal silence. It was as if we were having two different conversations. I was speaking from concern, she from a completely different logic. Finally, she sighed. I needed space. And disappearing was the only way. Yes. The response was immediate. Without hesitation. Because if I told you, you were going to do exactly this, she continued. Ask, insist, make a problem out of it. I stood thinking for a second. There was some truth to that, but also something deeply contradictory. Asking is not making a problem, I replied. It is normal. For you, she said, not for me. That flat tone appeared again, as if everything boiled down to a simple difference of perspectives. I decided to change my approach. Who were you with? With friends, the ones from TikTok. Yes. Did you know them in person? I do now. That answer was short, but enough. She had taken those relationships into the real world. Where were you guys? Going out. Where exactly? This time she looked up, clearly annoyed. What does that matter to you? The question hit hard. It matters because you are my partner, I replied. And because you disappeared for 3 days. She shook her head. You do not have to understand everything I do. Yes, I do. I said more firmly, because this is not normal. And that was when everything changed for good. She looked right at me and said, I am an independent woman. I do not have to give you explanations for every little thing. There was an immediate silence. Not because there was nothing to say, but because that phrase, in that context, completely shattered everything we were as a couple. I stayed silent for a few seconds after hearing that, not because I did not have anything to say, but because I was trying to process what her words really meant. It was not just a phrase about independence. It was in practice a total denial of any responsibility within the relationship. I did not answer right away. I looked at her calmly and, instead of arguing, I did something different. I smiled. Not exaggeratedly, but enough to change the tone of the conversation. You know what? I said calmly. I think you are right. She frowned slightly, as if she did not expect that answer. You are an independent woman, I continued. Maybe I have underestimated you. Her expression changed almost instantly. It went from defensive to something closer to satisfaction. Forget my questions, I added. Do what you think is best for you. There was a brief silence. Then, for the first time since she had come back, she smiled. You are finally saying something coherent, she replied. I did not answer. She grabbed her purse and headed for the bathroom. I am going to take a shower, she said. Then I am going to my mom's house. I nodded slightly. That is fine. There was no more conversation. She showered, got changed, and without adding anything else, left the apartment. The door closed, and that was when I took action. The first thing I did was pick up the phone. I called the bank and asked for the immediate cancellation of the debit card she used. I did not give long explanations, I just requested the block. The process was fast. In a few minutes, the card stopped working. After that, I stood in silence for a moment, looking around the apartment. There were things of hers everywhere. Clothes in the closet, products in the bathroom, personal items in the living room, everything that once represented living together. Now it simply did not fit. So I started packing it up. I did not do it out of anger. I was not throwing things or acting impulsively. It was methodical, garment by garment, object by object. I placed everything into large bags I found in the closet. It took me quite a while. It was not just a few things. While I was doing it, I could not help but think about how fast everything had changed. How something that had been building for over a year could unravel in a matter of hours. When I finished, I tied the bags closed and left them by the door. Not inside the apartment, but right outside in the hallway. Then I remembered something else. The health insurance. Months ago, I had added Madison to my employer's health insurance plan. At the time, it seemed like a good idea, considering she was not working. I picked up the phone again, called the insurance provider, and requested they remove her from the plan. They asked me a few basic questions. Nothing complicated. In less than half an hour, the change was registered. When I finished, I put the phone on the table and sat down. I did not feel immediate relief, nor guilt. It was more like a strange sense of closure mixed with uncertainty. A few hours passed. It was already night when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Then the sound of the door. Madison was back. When she tried to open the door, she first noticed the bags. She moved them so she could get through and walked in with a confused expression. What is this? She asked. I did not answer right away. She walked closer, clearly annoyed. Hey, I am talking to you. Those are your things, I said. She finally frowned. Why are they outside? Before I could answer, she pulled out her phone. And why is the card not working? She added. I tried to pay for something, and it was declined. I looked straight at her. You are independent. No. Her expression changed instantly. What? Get your own money. There was a few seconds of silence. Did you cancel my card? She asked. Yes. Are you serious? Completely. She stood motionless for a few seconds processing it. Then her tone changed. You cannot do that. I already did. That is not what I meant, she replied, raising her voice. Then explain to me what you meant, I answered calmly. Because disappearing for 3 days and saying that I have no reason to know anything, that is not a relationship. You are exaggerating, she said. And I need clarity. That seemed to fire her up more. This is manipulation, she accused. You are punishing me. I shook my head. No, I am adjusting the situation to what you laid out yourself. Do not twist things. I am not doing that. You said you are independent. I am respecting that. Her breathing got heavier. You are insensitive. I did not answer. You know what? She continued. This says a lot about you. Maybe, I said. Or maybe it just means that I am not going to keep holding up a dynamic where you decide when you are around and when you are not. She laughed, but out of anger. How easy for you. It is not easy, I replied. It is just clear. She put her hands to her head, frustrated. This is not what I meant by independence. Then you should have explained it better. There was a silence. Then she looked at me again. And the insurance? I did not answer immediately. It is still active, right? I looked straight at her. No. Her expression completely changed. What do you mean no? I canceled that too. She stood completely still. Are you serious? Yes. You are a. She stopped, searching for words. This is too much. No, I replied. What happened these last few days was too much. Her eyes started to fill with tears. You cannot do this to me. I already did. After all, precisely because of that, I interrupted her. Because what we have built does not match what you did. She started to cry. Not quietly. It was a mix of anger and frustration. I just wanted to feel free, she said through tears. Then start by supporting yourself. That phrase did not help. You have no idea what it is like to be in my shoes. Maybe I do not, I said, but I do know what it is like to be in mine. She wiped her tears with her hand. This is not going to end like this. I do not expect it to. She looked at the bags by the door. Then she looked at me, and at that moment I knew that what we had was gone. The following days were strange. There were no texts, no calls, no attempts to talk. After what happened, I assumed each of us was processing the situation in our own way. In my case, I tried to focus on work and keep up some sort of routine. Even though it was not something easily forgotten, I thought it would all end there. I was wrong. A couple of days later, a coworker came up to me with his phone in his hand. Hey, is not this your ex? When I saw the screen, I felt a weird mix of surprise and resignation. It was Madison. She had uploaded a video to TikTok. It was not just any video. It was one of those where someone tells their side of a failed relationship. She was recording herself with a serious tone, as if she were talking about something difficult. I watched it in full, and from the first few seconds, I understood that she was not telling the story how it actually happened. In the video, she claimed she had been in a relationship with a controlling man who made her feel dependent, who constantly pressured her to work, not for growth, but because, according to her, he wanted to take advantage of her. That made zero sense. I had been covering practically all the expenses for months, but in the context of the video, her version sounded coherent. She also insinuated that I had a drinking problem. That made me frown, not because it affected me directly, but because of how absurd it was. I am not someone who drinks often, much less someone with an addiction, but I understood what she was doing. She was building a narrative, a simpler, more convenient one, easier to believe. She also said she had decided to go away for a few days to think, and that there she realized she was in a toxic relationship. Nothing about disappearing without letting me know, nothing about the card, nothing about the insurance, nothing about the months without working. It was a whole different story. The video started gaining traction. It did not go massively viral, but enough to generate engagement. And that was where something interesting happened. The comments. A lot of people did not believe her. Not because I had come out to defend myself, I did not, but because there were obvious inconsistencies. Some people started asking questions, pointing out details that did not add up, things she avoided answering. Others pointed out that the story seemed incomplete, and then a comment popped up that changed everything. It was from someone I recognized by name, one of those friends she had been hanging out with. The comment read, "Stop lying. No one forced you to do anything. You just did not want to work." It was not a long message, but it was direct, and above all, it came from someone who knew her. That comment started getting replies, people asking if it was true, asking for context, and little by little the video's narrative began to crumble. Not in an explosive way, but progressively. More people started noticing that something did not fit, that there were contradictions, that certain parts were overly simplified. I did not intervene, I did not reply, I did not post anything, and to be honest, I realized something at that moment. When a story does not hold up on its own, you do not need to debunk it. It falls apart on its own over time. A few days later, Madison uploaded another video. This time the tone was completely different. She was crying. She talked about how hard it was to put yourself out there, how cruel people on the internet could be, that she had only wanted to share her experience. She mentioned the negative comments, said that no one knew what she had really gone through, that it was unfair. But the problem was no longer just what she was saying, it was the context. The people who had seen the first video, then the comments, and now this second one, already had a formed opinion, and that opinion was not in her favor. The comments on that new video were not supportive, at least not for the most part. Many were criticisms. Others were mockery. Some took her friend's comment and repeated it. There were even those who started using clips from the video as memes. Nothing massive, but enough to be obvious. I watched all of that from the outside, without participating, without intervening, and I did not feel satisfaction, nor pity. It was more of a confirmation. Decisions have consequences. She decided to disappear without warning. She decided to justify it as if it were something normal. She decided to tell an incomplete version in public, and now she was facing the backlash from people who, even though they did not know the whole story, could tell when something did not add up. In my case, the story ended the day I packed up her things and closed that door. Everything that came after was no longer a part of my life, and honestly, I prefer it stays that way. Comment. This story really made me reflect on how important it is to set clear boundaries in any relationship. I believe we all deserve someone who truly respects our time, our feelings, and our peace. When we start accepting less than we deserve, it slowly affects our self-worth and inner peace. I've learned that genuine kindness must begin with being kind to ourselves first. Taking full responsibility for our own happiness is one of the most powerful steps we can take. Sometimes, choosing to step back isn't giving up. It's choosing your own peace and well-being. I hope you take a quiet moment today to think about the relationships in your life and how they make you feel. Remember that healing takes time, but it always starts with respecting yourself. You are worthy of love that feels safe, balanced, and mutual. Let's keep encouraging each other to make choices that bring more calm and self-respect into our lives. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.